risk tolerance, followed by the overall board risk register. They invite Boyd and Miriam to speak to that.
Thank you, Boyd. Unfortunately, I think Miriam hasn't joined me today, so I'm going to speak on this paper. So got just what is really an update paper on what's a journey to improve or standardise the risk processes within NHS Highland. And so it's really an update to show that we've now had an executive team session as which is part of our recommendations from the internal audit, which was done on risk management systems for the organisation. And the executive team have met to look at risk appetite and tolerance, and have been led through a development session on that. And the model represented in the paper is one that's been implemented in NHS Lanarkshire. So it is today's paper was a sequencing issue. It was required an update today, but perhaps not the best time, as I think there are several more steps to be taken within this journey, including, for instance, a development session with the whole board, which will need to be factored in. And so therefore, this paper reports on part of what is a work in progress and will, as previously described in other board meetings, probably take a couple of years at least to fully see through all of the changes that we wish to do for the systems. So that with that, I will stop as I see at least one hand is up and allow questions. Maybe I think Gaynor is his hands up.
Gaynor.
Thank you, Boyd. I mean, I think this is a good start, and we've talked about risk lots of times before. We talk about the risk register in our committees. I think what we have before us today is much more about the risk tolerance rather than the risk appetite. And I agree. I think what we need going forward really is a risk appetite exercise that's run with the whole board. And we have had those done previously within NHS Highland. And I think the thing for us to work on as a board going forward, which will take the most time, because obviously the risk appetite exercise would be quite a short exercise. But I think the thing that will take the most time going forward is how we take both our risk tolerance and our risk appetite and apply that to our risk register on an ongoing basis. I think it's shaping up really well. I know we're going to talk about the risk register next. So, we have those risks. And the matrix that's described in this paper around risk tolerance is no different to what we've been using before, in a sense, for scoring our risks. I think the thing that we probably have to work on as a board, how do we take then the risk appetite that we'll come out with as a board risk appetite, and how does that influence the mitigations that we take for each of our risks? How does that shape things going forward? How does that shape the risks that are on our risk register? So I think that's the medium to longer term goal for us. But I think it's a good first start. Thank you.
Thanks. If I can come back just to that, Chair. So one of the greatest challenges has been to get a common understanding both of terminology and of approach, and to get something that can be easily embedded within the organisation without confusion. And that has been, I think that's why colleagues have now looked at the Lanarkshire model, which presented as an adopted model elsewhere in Scotland, which took a very simple approach. So therefore a very simple, straightforward sort of way of identifying risk and considering it. Getting people to both understand the terminology, and then the difficult bit, as you've just said, is applying the subjective judgment to that. And it's well known that any single item in life could be viewed by two different people in an entirely different risk basis. You know, one person thinks climbing a tree's too risky and the other will do it, or climbing the stairs, whatever. And so that subjective bit is the harder bit, as you say, and that around both the appetite and the tolerance, getting an idea of how we do that when there's such a sea of opinions or subjective views, and that is one of the challenges that we face, but we have to work through that.
Okay, we have a raft of people waiting to raise points. Alex is the first.
I got it finally. I don't think it was first, but it doesn't matter. Well, I'll bash on. Yeah, great start, and it is a start. The concern I've got with the tolerance level that you have is that when you look at the board assurance, the board's risk register, you've got an awful lot of risk sitting there with a target of 16 to 20. Now, that's way above what we're saying is tolerated, and probably what we're saying is acceptable in terms of our risk appetite. So we need to consider the whole thing in the round, and I know it's a start. It's more a concern I always had, is that some of our targets were what I thought was way too high, and some of the targets and some of the actual current were sitting at 20 in some cases. Hopefully this exercise and the exercise we go through in terms of the development session will be able to clarify some of that situation that we have. In terms of 10 being the tolerance, yeah, it's a number. It's a number. You can see how it works in the chart. That's fine. I've seen 12 work. I've seen 15, 16 work. But it's getting, as you say, it's getting your head around that terminology of what we're willing to accept, what it means operationally, what it means to the risk registers further downstream. Bearing in mind we're looking at it from a corporate point of view, and the tolerances will be different at the operational level than it will at the board level. It has to be, otherwise it's not going to work. So yeah, that's more comment than question, I think. Thanks.
Yes, and indeed a 10 might be very relaxing for some and still unacceptable for others. And also a 10 means a different thing to different people. And so the numerical approach immediately gives confusion, because two people can use the number 10 but think differently of what that means. And so for the session with the execs, we try to switch to terminology and definitions to try and get away from the misunderstanding that talking about a number instantly gives, unless there's really good clarity about what the number means. Everybody will look at the number differently. And so that's one of the challenges. And I think the current collective view is that we may well need, having used the auditors to assist us previously, we may need to think again about what expertise we get to assist us in working out how to put a common approach into ultimately an organisation of more than 10,000 people.
Okay, I've got Sarah and then Susan.
Thanks, Boyd, and thanks, Boyd. So I think the sort of little table on page 44 is actually very simple but very, very helpful. I know that some of the discussions we've had in the past have been around, you know, when and how to escalate. So that was really helpful for me to understand that a little bit better. And as others have said, this is a bit of an iterative process, and I guess my request would be in the next iteration if we could kind of develop that that table a bit further. And I'm really interested in the role that the individual committees play in this process. Obviously, each committee will be discussing the risks that are aligned to their area of work, and that's very important. And I can see in the kind of the orange box. There's a bit in the description there about the governance committees and what they do with it there. So I think it would just be good to take that further a little bit. Appreciate each committee will have a slightly bespoke approach, but I think if we can get some sort of consistency and routine built into that process, I think that will really help with the overall assurance that we can get from that process. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, and it's in some ways the difficulty of any paper that's, as you say, expressing part of an iterative process is that at the moment, if we can get the execs and non-execs better aligned, that would be a start. But then clearly a priority would be to get the governance committees then tuned in to that in the same way with the leadership of the relevant execs and non-execs that have become aligned through EDG and board development sessions. It's proving slower to get everybody on the same page than had been anticipated, say, a year ago when we started the journey really initially last summer. And it has taken longer than we all might have anticipated. But I think that's the direction of travel that we have to take, and getting this to the governance committees and then making sure that what's in the operational units is also aligned has been very much part of the trajectory of what we need to do.
Susan, then Anne, then Alistair.
Thank you, Boyd. It's plural. One point there about, completely understanding the challenge around getting everybody to agree what does 10 mean, but that's why you put lots of heads in it, because you then come up with a collective approach to it. And for me, it's always about how you just draw attention to something and the discussion that then leads you to follow, rather than the 10 itself being the answer. So that was just one observation. The other was one about, a bit linked to what Sarah has said on the monitoring and reporting, and I'd be interested to see the flow through from other operational risk registers and lower down the system. How do they feed into this point? And a comment from previous audit committees I've been involved with, where the audit committee on a regular basis has called on the full suite of risk registers that relate to a topic and been able to follow them right the way through and just follow a line for a point, just to see how it's going. So an observation. Thank you.
Yes, and there's our auditors have assisted us with doing a risk management audit, and so there's quite a lot in the action plan from that. Many of the things to be done were to be done now at the end of September. There are a few that are still to do. So there is, I guess that in isolation, this paper simply is expressing one element of many strands, and so it was simply that it was on the board list of get an update at this stage. But there's also a whole lot of other stuff that's been happening within the audit itself and the action plan that arose from that. So probably there's a more comprehensive series of papers that will need to come to execs and non-execs further down the line.
Okay,
So just again, as Susan said, taking on board what Boyd has said about 10 can mean lots of different things to different people. I just wondered, my understanding is that the current rating is 16 in our policy. So I just wondered, why the thought was that should go down to 10, and what impact EDG thinks that will have. Sure. Will that make us a less risky organisation or not?
And I think that therein lies the nub of the question. I think you start to focus on the numbers rather than the concept, and I'm not sure I know what the numbers mean, or know that everybody knows the same of the numbers. So the key thing ultimately is the principle that everything carries risk, and how do we quantify how much risk any individual thing has. And then as an organisation, which will always carry risk because many clinical activities have inherent risk within them, it's how do we work out that risk and also what the mitigations and actions around the risk to minimise it might be, and therefore when you do all of that, what's the acceptable level at which that risk is then acceptable. And I suppose the numbers can mislead a bit because you concentrate on an abstract because the detail is very complex and often across many things. A good example I've come across is it's risky to drive your car because you can crash, but if you manage speed, if you stay within the highway code, if you wear your seatbelt, and if you're constantly not distracted but observing. So in other words, a whole lot of different actions that you take to mitigate the risk of driving and the risk of crashing. I couldn't put a number on that risk, if you like, but I can understand the amount of risk there is. It's probably there, but not high, but it could happen. And then the things that I will do to mitigate the risk, which is quite a list of things which I build into my driving system so that as I conduct myself as a driver, I minimize the risk. I think it's getting the numbers become a shorthand for an organization to understand, but ultimately the most important thing is that you have the right raft of mitigations and that you think about the inherent risks with whichever situation it is. And then the difficult bit for the board will be those things that are top of the pile, most risky or of greatest impact if it did go wrong, would find a way up to or close to the overall board strategic risk register because they're the biggest things and cannot necessarily be held at a lower risk register within the organisation.
Okay, Alistair and then Alex.
Yes, thank you. I think we could look back on the journey that we've been on to get to this stage, and I think we've done extremely well in improving the risk management process, the risk understanding process, and I think the input from Miriam and the previous risk manager, and maybe Boyd could update us on the recruitment process for the current risk manager. But I think it has been quite a journey, and I think there's a far greater understanding at board level and probably at strategic committee level as to the risk management process. To me, we're not there yet. We are, as I say, on a journey there. We are quite well along the road. But to me, a risk register, a risk management process needs to be usable, effective, and understood. And I'm not convinced yet that we've got the understanding on the embedding it across the organisation. And I think that's the next phase we probably need to move on to. We talk about numbers being subjective, and that goes back to my point about understanding. We need to eliminate as much as we can some of the subjectivity around this so it becomes more objective and we're more precise, and that will refine in time as we become more experienced with it, as the committees take more ownership of it. But I think what we can be sure of is that the progress that we've made to date has been good. We're moving in the right direction. I think Sarah and Susan's point about committees taking ownership, about being able to drill up and down risk registers to different levels is something we need to build on. And I can see that when we review this next time that we'll have advanced even further. But one concern to the audit committee at its last meeting, Boyd, was the risk manager post, because that is what steered so much of it so far, and that post becoming vacant was a worry to the audit committee. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to get into too much detail on the recruitment, but there was a secondment arranged, and then something happened that meant that we then further had a vacancy. There's also some thinking about the risk manager that we've had has been embedded within clinical governance, and actually really what we need to think about is corporate risk management, and possibly that means a corporate risk manager. And so there are some very active considerations around all of that. And this links to the idea that perhaps we will need to commission some assistance, not just in terms of recruiting somebody, but in terms of actually getting the right model that suits what is, for this kind of organisation, a mixture of corporate risk, but also, as described already, clinical risk.
Alex and then Jerry.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. Yeah, Boyd, I agree. I think the corporate risk and the manager sitting in there is probably, from my point of view, the best one. Going back to the answer you gave to Anne, the tolerance of 10, are you talking about a mitigated answer, a mitigated risk of 10, or are you talking about unmitigated risk? Because I would be much happier if it was a mitigated risk at 10, but with an indicator of what the unmitigated risk is. We used to set the two. You had the unmitigated risk number, and then you had the mitigated risk number. You worked on the mitigated risk one, but you were aware of the unmitigated. If it's an unmitigated risk above 16, we'll have it. A mitigated risk above 10, we'll have it. You can play those tunes as you go, but we need an explanation in the paper as to whether that's mitigated or unmitigated as it stands. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think I'd agree with you, and I'm trying to avoid discussing specific numbers, but I think some mitigated risks will be very big regardless of the mitigation, and they must come up. And there are some unmitigated risks that start high and you can mitigate them down. And I think that's the principle. So I've managed to answer that without saying any number whatsoever. So I'm really pleased, because I do think the numbers distract all of us, whether we consciously realise it or not. And I think the numbers is a useful shorthand when everybody is aligned. But I'm very conscious from all of my workings that most people are not on the same page about any number at the moment, and it is one of the great concerns. But we'll get there.
Jerry.
Thank you, Boyd. Yeah, I mean, I've been sitting pondering a lot, and I think I agree with Boyd on the numbers are a distraction. I've always thought of risk in terms of the likelihood and the impact. And that's what I consider, and I think that allows you to get a far more in-depth understanding of the nature of the risk, which you're actually then trying to put onto your risk register, and it takes you, I think it takes you into Alex's point, you get a much better understanding of what actions you need to take to mitigate that, rather than say, well, anything above 15 I have to have an action, anything below 15 I can ignore, where we perfectly well know that there'll be things between, and I'm getting into the annoying habit of talking about numbers, of end between 10 and 14, of which they do need mitigation. So I think we do need to think about the likelihood and the impact, and that's what I always used to say to people when they gave me the score. I always used to say, well, you need to take me through how you arrived at that, because it's the likelihood and the impact which I'm actually particularly interested in. That then leads to the range and the time scale, which we haven't spoken about, of actions that need to be taken at a tolerable level. And I think it's a really, going back to the numbers, I would view 10 as a risk. How far above 10 are we willing to live before we actually demand actions to be taken to bring it back to so I think we're having a really good discussion today, but I think what's evident to me is we do need the space to have a much more in-depth discussion, because I think our level of knowledge now is so far higher than it was a year or so ago, that we can actually start to home in on the things which we can then take forward and allow that to influence the operational risk registers with the guidance of the board. So I'm much encouraged with the paper that we've got today, and actually far more encouraged by the discussion we're having today, because I think it's beginning to show a breadth and a depth of understanding across the board, which with a little bit more teasing, I think we can reach a general consensus of where we need to be.
Thanks, Jerry. I would observe that there is a very growing interest in the topic, and to me, a sense of greater engagement as people realise this is quite difficult conceptually, yet it's pretty important as you try and set your organisation's systems and processes, and also with one eye on later papers today, how you think about your strategy, because the strategic approach of an organisation at this end of the organisation, the sort of board perspective of it, we have to think about what are the risks over the next 5 or 10 years, what are the risks related to national and regional issues, what are the risks related to the demographic changes in our population, and what are the risks related to our geography. And so strategic risks will necessarily be very different to the risks within a cardiology unit, or the risks in intensive care, or in a community service, dealing with clinical emergencies or whatever. These are all risks are valid, but at board level, we particularly have to think of the things that we need to shape the organisation and steer it because of those strategic risks for the whole and for the greater part of the organisation. And we need to think about how very specific risks are held in the areas where they can be, where the mitigations are most applicable, and where the actions are most readily taken. And that kind of risk would still be captured in something at a high level, but in a much more catch-all way. And our strategic direction has to be partly determined by what we consider to be the greatest risks to us. So getting enough workforce of working age to deal with all the things we'll have to do is an example. So that's an example of something. Whereas we've talked about the risk to, if we don't recruit a risk manager, then that's a risk. But that's in itself, that's a risk that sits somewhere else. It's somewhere else. But the overall, there are higher, more general risks that we would express in a strategic way. So I think that we have some way to go yet, and I do think that next steps will include a board development session. This is really updating today that we've had the executive session, and that this is what we covered in that, and there will now need to be what probably will be an interesting session with the non-execs and execs. And at the same time, I do think that there are some additional pieces of advice and steering that we will need to get as an organisation to help us see clearly through to where we need to go.
Thank you, Boyd, and thanks to all the contributors. It's been a good, healthy discussion for us. I sense that we're content with the direction of travel, that this is a developing story, and that we're happy to agree to the proposal, the general direction of the proposal in the paper. Okay. The risk register, Boyd, back to you.
Thanks. In some ways, it's linked to this update, and so Miriam Morrison has been meeting with the execs who hold risks on the board strategic risk register, and has been doing that actively in the last number of weeks. And so the paper, just to give information that quite a number of the risks on our board register have had new actions or additional actions which have happened, which executive directors have advised have been taking place over the last couple of months. And so these will be incorporated into the next version of the board risk register, and I would hope that that updated version would then be form part of our papers for the next board meeting.
Okay, any observations or questions about the register? Fiona?
Yeah, and it was just really to give a bit of an update, because this is something that from a staff governance perspective, myself and Sarah have been looking at. So we trialled a new sort of template at the staff governance committee in September to sort of focus ourselves on our strategic risks, and that we found that quite helpful actually in terms of getting some assurance. It also highlighted that we delivered against quite a few of the actions, and therefore on some of the actions we needed to work to identify further actions to take, because the 3 risks we've got sitting there are quite big and chunky risks, and we need to keep sort of breaking those mitigating actions down and moving them forward. I think the other thing it identified to us was that our next stage, which we're going to do at the November meeting, is bring forward the relevant operational risk registers to review, because that's where we need to gain some assurance around at a local level, the kind of key risk levels, mitigating actions on things related to staff governance and that we're discussing, such as mandatory training, compliance, staffing levels, etc., to make sure that they're reflective of the relative risk and impact to the organisation and consistently rated. And that gets us into, it's similar to the discussion we've just been having around the strategic risks are one thing, but as a governance committee, we're keen to ensure that actually that operational risk register has the right information on it and that it's consistent. So it's a work in progress for us, but I think we feel we've kind of made a good start on it.
Okay. Hey, Karen.
Thank you. Just in terms of the workings between the risk register and the committees that hold scrutiny over those and then provide assurance to the board, just to note that for risk 662, clinical strategy and redesign, at the minutes that we agreed at the beginning of the meeting today, the clinical governance committee did ask that risk be reviewed from the current medium risk level, and I think that hasn't been able to be done between the last one and this one. But I also do note that on top of that, we do have item 14 in today's paper, which was probably one of the missing things, and around which the committee was maybe looking for more assurance on, and particularly in terms of timescales of the development of and implementation of a clinical strategy or our NHS Highland strategy. And so I hope that gives you some idea of not only when we look at committee, we can report that back in terms of the assurance that we can give to the board, but then when the risk register comes back, what I've told you today will hopefully link up a little to what we reported back in July around that particular risk.
That's helpful, Karen. Anne?
So when we've had previous development sessions around risk management, we've always been encouraged to think about these issues, not just in terms of risks, but also opportunities. And I just wonder whether the National Care Service is something that could be seen as both a risk and an opportunity, and perhaps as something that should appear in our strategic risk register in the future. Thanks.
I would have thought so. Over to Bob.
Not for me. I think the National Care Service is something that's very much emerging, and I think we're all everyone is beginning to understand what it may or may not mean. There's just now, I think there is a national consultation process which runs until early November about it. So it's certainly something that's coming over the horizon. So I think Anne makes an excellent point that how do we fit in the considerations and indeed what the consequences or opportunities or unintended consequences of such major change to systems. So certainly that could be part of the future development session that we will undoubtedly need to consider.
Horizon scanning must be a key part of the risk register.
Yeah, I would agree. It is most definitely a strategic risk for us. We don't actually know what it means. You know, we don't know the full detail of what it's going to translate to, but of course we know whatever change happens, any change anywhere is going to affect our system. So we probably do need to think about how we articulate and reflect that within our risk register and where that would best sit, whether it's as part of our strategy development and something we need to be aware of, or whether it's a risk in its own right. So we'll take that away and consider it.
Thanks, Pam. Are we happy to agree the proposal for the revision to the risk appetite and tolerance? Okay, thanks. In that case, we can move on to the item on strategy development. And Lorraine is with us, and she's been waiting patiently. Lorraine, or is it David that's going to do this?
I'm here, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Ruth, would you be able to share the slides, please?
Yes, I will do just as soon as I can. Just give me a second, please. I think I'm going to get somebody telling me how to do this. I'm so sorry. I think I've... just give me a moment. I was given a masterclass in this last night, and already I'm struggling to do this for you just as you want me to do it. Oh, right.
I'll pop along, Ruth.
It's okay. I think I might have got it. Just 1 second. There we are. I think that's it. Is that right?
Perfect. Well done.
Excellent.
Thank you. Just like to say that I'm delighted to join NHS Highland really and facilitate the development of the strategy, as is my first board meeting. So thank you. Next slide, please. So NHS Highland really identified that a kind of pivotal part of our future development would be to have a strategy to really underpin all the good work that's going on in the services. And a clear strategy has got many benefits for an organisation rather than sitting dusty on a shelf, as some people think that they do. And it will really help us define that future models of health and care that we kind of know have to be different. Okay, we've had COVID. You've just been speaking about the new emerging care consultation. So how do we take that all together? And I think it's really important that we embed a culture of ownership with the strategy. We really want to encourage that the strategy's got a place in all of our population, all of our people, kind of as part of their appraisal process or what they understand our health and care system to be for the future. And I'd like to describe, Chair, today at a really high level the process that we'll take to develop it. Thank you, Ruth. Next slide. So we had a really good board development day last month that gave us a lot of information and described a lot of the intelligence that we know about our future state of NHS Highland, what our long-term conditions will look like, and quite a lot of modelling for the future. And from that, we really pulled out some themes. So the key things we want to focus on are our population. They have to be pivotal to whatever we do, and we must listen and engage with them. Fiona's described today a lot about our people and culture work, and this must complement the work that we are currently doing with our people but also for them to be part of the strategy in the future. And the other three, performance, progress and pathways, are really about how we will do that as a system. Next slide, please. So from our board development day, I assimilated all of the feedback that we got over that day into 15 kind of strategic imperatives that we'll go out with as a framework to engage on. And they'll focus around our 5 Ps as well. So there's 15 here, and as you'll see, they've encapsulated a lot of the work that we will aim to do and what we aim for as a system. But these will really be shaped by our engagement with our people and our population moving forward, but we'll give them something key to feed back on. Next slide, please, Ruth. So for me, what does success look like? So it has to encapsulate our mission and values at its core, and we must have that all around the strategy so that people understand them. And I know a lot of work's ongoing with our with Fiona again to really embed those and for our workforce to understand those. We really have to communicate clearly to empower our population and our people. And a point Sarah made to me last night was that it's not just communication or engagement out, it's communication in and vice versa, that we must keep that dialogue going. And I think everyone has to have the opportunity to engage in the process, not just through our groups, but through individuals feeding back in areas where we wouldn't normally engage with, so all levels of the organisation, because everyone's got an important part to play in how our future looks. And I think everyone must understand how it applies to them. Can our porters on the ground do a key role in taking people to theatres, delivering our mail, doing lots of stuff, but we can't, the system can't run without them. So everyone must understand how it applies to them. And we must translate it so that we know as an organisation where we're aiming for in the next 5 years. I think we need to also understand the actions, and I've heard a lot of that today about how we will implement it and how we will monitor our performance with the IPQR, our governance committees moving forward. And we also must take into account that transformation agenda and keep our services stable while doing that. I think the final point in this slide is we must commit wholly as an organisation to really embed in our strategy and committing to it for our future. Next slide, Drew. So I tried to do a slide that just really encapsulates everything that we're going to do, given the challenges of time today. So we're going to set up a strategy population, or we already have a strategy population engagement group, and that'll focus on how we're going to communicate with our population and how they will feed in. We're going to set up a strategy workforce engagement group, really working with Fiona to go alongside the listen and learn exercises, but also how do we engage differently and get that feedback with departments and services. There's a lot of governance in individual groups. Katrina yesterday, who is the area clinical partnership forum, how do we engage with those areas that are pivotal to help us engage better in the future? And we've got a session with MPs and MSPs next month to discuss this with them and really get their input, but everyone's important in there in terms of feedback. And I think it's really important that we develop that communication and engagement. Ruth's been great in helping with that. So it's how do we engage with the press, social media, videos, virtual face-to-face to really take that forward. Next slide, Ruth. And really just finally, just to give a high level, the timeline of our strategy development, aiming to have it back to you completed in board in April. At your April board to really get sign off. There'll be quite a lot of work needs to go on in between with all members of the board to get it in that place. But this gives you an overview of what we're aiming for, how we're intending to engage, and what our process will be moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lorraine. And looking for comments or questions to Lorraine on her presentation, starting with Sarah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lorraine. really good to see that again, and thank you. As you said, I've been pinging Lorraine with lots of questions and comments, so thank you for picking all those up. I really appreciate it. It's an ambitious piece of work, but especially given where we are at the moment, but I'm really pleased to see how this is coming forward. I think we talk a lot about developing plans and strategies, but something about the way you've pulled this together is really making me feel quite inspired and optimistic about this moving forward. So thank you for that. I really like the collaborative approach, the emphasis on communication and engagement. I think that's absolutely critical. And I really like the aspiration, the bit you talked about there, giving the example of a porter, making it real, making it relatable, making it something useful to the organisation, I think is very important. Two things that I wanted to draw out, recognising that what you've given us is a very kind of high level presentation, and there'll be a huge amount of detail that we haven't seen yet or hasn't been developed yet, but there are two things in particular that I would like to see as it develops. The first part is around partnership, and there's a really good paragraph in your paper about kind of partnerships we have, and it would be good to see that drawn out a little bit more. And I'm thinking about sort of, I suppose with my IJB hat on, I'm thinking about Argyll and Bute Council and of course the Highland Council as well. But there's something for me that we can explore and some learning to be had from the independent sector, the private sector. We obviously work very closely with them in providing a lot of our care services, and I think there's some really good stuff we can get out of that as a partnership, and it might not be the same kind of partnership we think of when we're thinking about the council, but I think it's one that we really want to tap into, and the third sector, of course. And the other thing that I would like to see coming through as this develops is realistic medicine. And I suppose it is implied in a lot of what is said in the imperatives in the document that you shared with us. But actually, I think it would be good to get really explicit about it. You know, in the past, we've had some fantastic presentations at board around the realistic medicine agenda. And I know it's something that, you know, carries on being a strong element in the way that we work. So it'd be really good to see that being sort of pulled through and highlighted. I think that would be really beneficial. Thank you.
Thanks. So maybe take one or two other contributions before I come back to you. I have Sandra, Len Gaynor.
Sorry, apologies. Thank you, Boyd, and thank you, Lorraine. It's really nice to see the strategy actually as it's outlined at the moment. So I want to just make some comments from the academic sector, from the University of the Highlands and Islands in terms of opportunities around partnership. There are a lot more interactions happening between the university and NHS Highland at board level and at a number of levels just now, and there's a lot of gains, I think, particularly over workforce development and involvement with the Strategic Workforce Engagement Group, particularly in light of some of the changes that are happening from a strategic point of view just now within the university, increasing merging of the partnerships, a focus on development of a faculty of health, social care and life sciences with a bit more resource coming from that, and a principal that's very heavily invested in healthcare and looking for opportunities to broaden that level of interaction. So I think there are a number of areas there within the strategy, but also to pick up on Anne's point from this morning around evaluation. So she was talking at that point about the culture programme, but to remember that you've got an academic population next door to the hospital and in a wider partnership that could be consulted on things like that around evaluation of your progress, your pathways and your performance, and really add to the value of what the outcomes from the strategy might be in the longer term, and particularly around qualitative research, socioeconomic type of research and what you're aiming to do. So any point of engagement, I think we would really value, and particularly because of some of the changes that are going on just now, I think it's an ideal time for looking at that collaboration. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandra. Maybe get Lorraine to respond to these two contributions.
Yeah, thank you. We are undertaking that mapping of the partnerships, Sarah, and all our engagement points at the moment. and they're not described fully in that slide, but completely appreciate that we need to do that because there'll be a wealth of information in there that we need to consider. We're also looking at that kind of realistic medicine, but also the plethora of national strategies and other imperatives that we need to think about when developing the strategy so that it is fit for purpose for our future, but also to reflect on areas that Scottish Government have developed. And there's a number around palliative care, for example, and where we need to go with that. So it's really taken into that process, all that key points I need to map out to understand where they fit. And I'd really welcome that opportunity, Sandra, to discuss that evaluation and implementation as we start to work through. I think that would be a really good opportunity to work in partnership about that for the future. So I'd really welcome that. So perhaps we can set up to meet to discuss where we've got to so far and take that on board.
Okay, Gaynor and then Adam.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Lorraine. I think what I'm really interested in is drawing out more around how we involve our population. So how are we going to go about hearing from those people not normally heard from? And they're a mix of minority groups, but they're also how do we hear from well people? Because sometimes we hear more from groups and user groups that already use our services. So how we hear from people that are currently well, and in particular, probably around that population, how we hear from children and young people, because they're going to be our future service users. So both children and young people with or without additional support needs or difference. And I think something I'd also like to see is how we reflect both how we have an urban on one hand, but at the other end of the scale, a very remote and rural context in some of our geographies, and how that gives us both challenges but opportunities as a board to deliver services and healthcare and care across the board. Thank you.
Sorry, Adam.
Thanks, Boyd. Thanks, Lorraine. I suppose I just wanted to echo those who say it's a challenging thing to do in the time available, and to try and communicate with and involve as wide a range of people as possible. Welcoming the recognition, obviously, that we need to do that we need to get ideas from everywhere, that we need to take the message out, that we need to, as I say, ensure involvement of as many people as possible. But coming back full circle, that's a big ask in the time available. But we'll need to do what we can to do that as best as we can, and everybody will help with that. Obviously, from my role and perspective, the staff side will obviously be very keen to be involved in that, and I know you've already been in touch to initiate discussions about the workforce strategy group, so that will be really good to get that going.
And Alex, and then we go back to Lorraine.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. I like it. I agree entirely with what they've said about the time scale. I think you've set yourself and us a very challenging one, but we'll hopefully help you get there. I think the point Sandra made about using UHI and the resource there, I think is crucial, particularly when you look at the other parts of the strategy that we've touched on, but haven't yet fully developed. So stuff like the energy, the sustainability, the carbon zero, all that sort of stuff, which is going to need a bit of R&D help as well as everything else, is where we can use the likes of the ERI up here as well. There's several places that we can tap into to get help and have discussions with, help us broaden the strategic approach. and then we'll get it in place, hopefully. Thank you.
Lorraine, do you want to respond to these points?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The vulnerable groups aspect, Gaynor, we are mapping for that particular area. There was quite a big exercise done in COVID, so there was quite a lot of engagement and feedback that we got at that time. So we're trying to take that all together to look at where that themes were at that point in time, but also to go back out to engage with them. And a key point about Currently Well will be really focused on that communication and engagement and making sure that we do engage people in all the communities in various different ways, like with social media or virtual face-to-face, so that they're encouraged not to come along to come along in any case. And there's also the kind of children, and probably got the terminology wrong, apologies, it's only a few weeks in, but the children and young people's panel that High Life have got, a children's parliament or something of that, that Highland have got. And Marie's McElwraith, who's the patient engagement manager, is going to facilitate that so we can get some really good views from there. And we'll also tie in with the work that's been doing to develop kind of the rural general hospitals and the work that's already been done around about Lochaber and the other areas to find out what feedback we got there and where we need to take that into the strategy for the future. So I hope that answers all the questions that you posed.
Thanks, Lorraine. David?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Lorraine, who's hit the ground running as she's coming to NHS Highland and has got pulled together a really good grasp of what the aspiration is around developing a multi-year strategy. Just to give assurance, Lorraine, we're not asking you to answer all the problems and give the detailed solutions of every aspect of even the questions that were asked today, but I think it's been able to try and put these in a context framework that allows us to move them forward. And equally, I think, you know, our expectations of engagement, I don't expect to get to the end of this and for every person to have engaged with it. But what we will do is try to give every opportunity for as many people to engage with this as possible. And the more people we engage, the less perhaps alignment we will get around an agreement around exactly how to go forward. So there will be some areas that will need further work, as well as some that will have very common views around. So it's not something that we have had before. Fiona was talking earlier about developing new techniques and new ideas, and this is very similar for us for NHS Highland. We haven't had a multi-year strategy like this before, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot as we go. Some will be, let's not do like that again. Equally, let's do more of that. So your patience and feedback through this process is going to be very important.
And we're not alone in developing strategy. Has been involved in where they are developing strategy, like Lanarkshire and Grampian, indeed. We're familiar with that one, Maureen. So we have reference points for that journey. It is the Highland Youth Parliament, I think, the one you were referring to.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I really, first of all, just want to thank Lorraine as well and putting the framework around this, because I think that's exactly what we needed to be able to get that line of sight. And I love the approach that she's taken. I think, and Lorraine and I come from a very similar background and a little bit of a similar career development. And we were quite used to delivering things much faster than people might think is normal. But I think the important thing about this is that it's not a static piece of paper that goes on a shelf. That's where strategies fail. This needs to be a dynamic and live document that we come back to, and the subsequent underpinning plans for translation will be part of the layering of this work. So, if we see the next 6 months as the piece of work, then scrub that, because it's not. That's just the beginning. That's setting the direction. We will have a lot of work to do thereafter. And you know, the world that we live in, where everything's changing and nothing's certain, means that we can't have anything that's so fixed, because we have to reevaluate it all the time in terms of what we understand and learn about what's going on in the world, and about our organisation, and about indeed the resources we've got to be able to deploy. So this will be ever changing. So what it does hopefully give us is a good springboard for being able to manage that well, and being able to evaluate against it and measure it against it. I think it has to be ambitious. We can find ourselves in the territory of urgent and sometimes miss what's important. And I think that's the world that you find yourself in when you're under extreme service pressure. You constantly react and deal with the urgent thing of today, and you miss the target of where we need to be going. And so this strategy is absolutely critical, and as is the aspect of this that will be health and social care, and that Tara French will be supporting and working alongside Lorraine to develop. We need to have a rethink of where we're going. That's part of the reform, and that's why I think that, you know, the strategy needs to take this level of priority, notwithstanding that will be perhaps difficult in terms of how we get that inclusiveness. However, we could be creative in that as well, in terms of how we get that feed in from the front line. It doesn't mean necessarily taking them out for hours from their workplace. There are lots of ways that they can contribute their suggestions on a daily basis. So we just need to make that easy for them to do. But for me, this is a critical lifeline. We need to think about where we're really going and how we reshape what we've got to be able to deliver the best care we can for the people of the Highlands, and indeed our component of the IGB in Argyll and Bute.
Gaynor.
Thank you, Chair. One last ask, and it's a bit of a tangent. When we launch our strategy and go to implement that, remembering that it's for public use as well as our use, on the back of that, are we able to then modernise our website? Because I think that increasingly through social media, but also through the use of our website, that is where the public will actually see this, see the outputs of it. And for example, just to flag up another NHS board, if you look at NHS 5, who revamped their website, I think it was over the last year or 2 years, it has a very different feel and a much more welcoming feel. And I think those things that happen after that, after the launch of the strategy, will really start to help people engage over that longer period of time. So that would be my plea. Thank you.
Here's Ruth Fry to give you the answer again.
Yes, thanks, Boyd. Just to reassure Gaynor there that yes, we are working on the website redevelopment, and in fact we've done quite a lot of engagement around that, and that includes around how we can use it as a better tool for consultation and engagement. So we should have the report back on that shortly, and that will enable us to then go to tender for the development side.
Some reassurance there, Gaynor. Okay, thanks to Lorraine for this item, and you've got 5 asks of us here that we approve the development of the plan, and that will focus on active engagement and listening across the population, people, partners, to ensure a shared strategic intent. Endorse the high-level approach being taken in the action section, develop a plan, agree the expectations of the board, to engage and receive monthly updates on progress. The final draft plan being presented at the April board meeting. No pressure there, Lorraine. Note that engagement from senior leaders, EDG board members, promote the strategy, and the importance of active engagement to engage with the process will be key to success. And finally, acknowledge the current risks, and that a more substantial risk register will be developed as we progress through the strategy development. I hope after my reading these 5 points that you're all going to agree to them. Okay, thank you, and thank you again, Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair, and everyone for your time. Really excited to take this on, so I'll be looking forward to coming back and reporting on that progress soon.
We look forward to having you back at the next board meeting with an update. Okay, on to another major topic, the National Care Service consultation. Louise, you're fielding this one.
Hiya, thank you very much. Okay, I'm not going to go through the paper in great length because I know that the agenda is fairly stretched and fairly tight, but the paper is really setting out the responses and the multiple responses that are going into the National Care Service consultation, both from professional bodies, operational groups, and also from the board and the IJB. So it's setting that detail out rather than what we're going to say in that response. But I'm more than happy to take any questions if there is anything particular from the paper that people wanted to ask about.
Okay, any questions for Louise on the paper? I think you've struck it well there. Lucky there, Louise. We're just being invited to note the approach being taken, and I would interpret the silence as being a degree of contentment.
Super, thanks.
Okay, thank you. And we move on to item 16, preparing for the winter influenza immunisation. Tim, are you taking this one?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, fairly, hopefully a fairly brief paper, and many of the issues have already been discussed earlier on in the context of flu and COVID. Both nationally and locally, it's been deemed sensible and straightforward to have a degree of merger between the vaccination and management programs for COVID and for flu. So this paper reports on the plans for that joint immunisation process. There are a range of other things that need to be done in order to combat flu and prepare for winter, which are largely covered under other elements of the board's work and other papers today and elsewhere. So this paper concentrates on the vaccination process. As I mentioned earlier, there are particular risks with flu for this winter. Last winter, flu was not particularly prominent, probably because of both seasonal or year-on-year effects, but also because of the efforts that have been made to counteract COVID and the precautions being taken. So it's particularly important this year to maximise uptake of flu immunisation, and therefore the cohorts that are included within the flu immunisation have been widened. The picture for flu and for COVID in terms of groups who are being immunised, particularly for COVID, does change or has been changing at a quite swift pace. So they're probably fairly clear how we are now. The paper sets out the model that the board has for immunisation. Essentially, it's a pragmatic model building on resources available both in terms of general practice, other primary care, and board-led vaccination clinics. We need to be conscious of staff capacity when it comes to immunisation. Across the whole system, staff are both tired from the hard work of COVID, but also we have staffing challenges for getting ready for the winter pressures which have started to come on us. So really the only option for delivery of a successful vaccination programme is to have this mixed model of both primary care and board-led vaccination, and the paper sets out how that will be delivered over the next few months. There is another large task that we have over the next few months, and that's consulting and preparing for how we will deliver further vaccinations. This is really this is called tranche 2 by Scottish Government, following the tranche 1 of first lot of COVID. We will need to move on to tranche 3 in future, but that's for further discussion out with this paper. I'm quite happy to take any questions or comments if there are any on flu and COVID immunisation.
Okay, any questions for Tim or any comments indeed? Okay, Jerry.
Thank you. Tim, I noticed in the paper the development of a LES for the COVID vaccination programme. Is there any thought to doing that across all the boards who'll be using GPs, or do you envisage that we will develop a truly local LES for Highland and Argyll and Bute?
Well, there is an enhanced service for across all of Scotland. So we use more general practice than generally than others, but for the current vaccination programme, it's a nationally agreed one.
But is it going to continue to be a nationally agreed one for the booster programme?
Yes. I'd certainly. We certainly rely on the national negotiation for what's happening this year. The proportion of when it comes to tranche 3, things maybe are likely to be very different, because at the moment we've got we're still at the end of the contractual arrangements, the old contractual arrangements with the GPs. So there are the local enhanced services or temporary enhanced services, which are nationally arranged. So that will hold until the end of the current GP contract.
Okay, Adam.
Thanks, Boyd. Thanks, Tim. The paper just refers briefly to the workforce required to deliver the mixed model. And I don't know, Tim, or maybe Fiona, if you can update us on where we are in terms of recruiting a sufficient size of a workforce to do this.
Thanks. I can't give precise figures, I'm afraid, Adam. I'm not quite up to speed with the recruitment, but the calculator, I'm pretty confident that we've got the balance right in terms of we have got staff recruited for clinics. There's further recruitment that will be that we can potentially do, but the planning for this stage over the next few months is based on a realistic appreciation of staff who've already been recruited and that we're in the process of recruiting, combined with primary care. And a lot of the initial flu vaccination is with primary care staff who are clearly already in post, but it is quite a challenging balance.
Pam, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to go back on what Jerry was asking about the LES. So I guess if it's a national enhanced service, it's set out nationally for everybody to apply, and that's a direct enhanced service. A local enhanced service suggests that we are putting a nuance on that and we're locally negotiating it. And I think when we did the COVID vaccination, we had an element of nuance to reflect our geography, etc. So that's probably the reason for the use of the LES, as opposed to, if it was a national one, it would, there's a DES and a LES. And now we have a TES, which is a new one on me. But I think, just to be clear, that so that board members understand that the local generally suggests that we have a nuance in that, but we can check that out further, because a national directive would be a direct enhanced service.
Okay, Alex.
Fiona, do you want to come in first? Are you going to answer that other bit or not?
Yeah, if that's okay.
Sure.
And it was just to build on what Tim had said in terms of the workforce. Obviously, we're working carefully on the workforce planning for this. It's wider than just vaccinators as well, because obviously preparation of vaccines, etc., and the pharmacy colleagues, etc., to deliver that can be quite challenging. So we're working hard on that. One of the things that we're also quite keen to do is kind of start to think about the longer term picture, because at the moment these things are working in relatively short term kind of bursts, and obviously the availability and willingness of people to work on sort of shorter term contracts and the stability around that for both our contact tracing and vaccination workforce is a challenge. But I think we've done a lot of good planning in the interim, and we've also been able to diversify our workforce much more now, so to be able to take advantage of the not just having to pull on registered staff for all the vaccination, which obviously, given the wider winter pressures in the system that we have and are anticipating, it's really important that we deploy registrants, kind of in the positions that most need them. So I think a lot of preparatory work still, I'm sure some challenges to go, and the longer term picture will be really helpful when we get that.
Thank you, Fiona. Alex.
Tim, what have we done communications wise? I've got scenarios running in my head where we've got kids at school who are going to get flu vaccinations. There's other kids in school who may be getting COVID vaccinations first dose. The parents have to get permission to get one or the other, or what have we done about getting them both? Or can they be combined? Like the adults are getting combined, where they're suggesting one in the left arm and one in the right. I know with kids it's a nasal spray for the flu, so it's slightly different. But all these things are potential problems if we haven't done the comms bit and the awareness bit right up front. So what have we done in that, particularly with the kids? Thanks.
Yeah, I would add, thank you for that's a very very good question, and I think it relates in terms of the paper to one of the risks that's highlighted around how complicated our local programme is. I think the national programme is complicated, and the local programme is potentially even more complicated than that. I'd also throw in another issue, which is I suppose really more important than the communication, and that's but it linked to that, and that is consent for the younger people. That we need to make sure that people aren't just turning up and either saying, well, we don't want this, or actually not wanting it, and then we need to avoid any where possible disagreement between children, families. So there are a whole lot of issues. It is a developing picture because of the changes in and the new announcements that have been made over the past few weeks. So we haven't got sort of a finished approach to that, and circumstances will vary from place to place. Also, we don't get it all right, and we have made done communications and had clinics where things haven't gone right. So we are learning from the mistakes that I'm afraid are almost inevitable. For most of the young people, we're relying on a local approach, building on relationships with local staff, and also letters that are going out with consents around to individuals. So there'll be a mixture of different services, whether in schools, slightly outside schools, drop-ins. So we are making use of other communication methods. And I noticed that Ruth is looking to comment. But we need to be also careful about not raising expectations about what's available and getting clinics swamped. We've had issues around people coming to clinics. I think with the vaccine, when vaccine passports were announced, we got a rush of young people who wanted to get to entertainment venues, and that causing long queues outside, dropping clinics. And so it's a balance of getting that right communication out, but not raising expectations beyond what we're able to deliver. So we're trying to get the balance right. But I think if the balance goes towards personalised communication, that's probably in the right direction.
Ruth, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Boyd. Yeah, I think Tim's probably covered actually the things I was going to mention there, but essentially, yes, the flu programme for children has started already with the consent, working with the schools, so that's already going out. And where we are for the 12 to 15-year-olds at the moment, the messaging we're giving is that they can attend the drop-in clinics that we have, provided they have read the information and they have the consent form that they need, and that's all available online. But we are also giving a very clear message on the website and on social media that there will be more bespoke clinics and more bespoke communication coming shortly.
Susan.
Thank you, Chair. Tim, could I ask what we're doing to encourage our own staff to take up the flu vaccine, considering there could be an increased vulnerability to it this year, and the pressures we've got on keeping staff teams, fit and well. And I think from memory, we had about a 60% uptake of it last year. Could we do something to get that a bit higher this time?
I mean, staff flu vaccination's already started, so we had the option, I suppose, of either getting going straight away or waiting to see how the picture emerged. So we decided to go straight ahead and begin flu vaccination around the start. But it's a similar mechanism, I think, to what we've done in previous years. Hopefully we'll get a similar uptake or higher uptake. So I don't think there's anything particularly new, but we continue with the communication channels and the way that things have worked in the past. But we're already well into the flu programme.
I think the previous Cabinet Secretary regularly expressed disappointment at the uptake by NHS workers. So the more we can do to increase uptake, the better, especially in the light of COVID. Okay, we're being asked to approve the high-level approach being taken. Are we happy to do so? Thank you, Tim. Now for 2 or 3 papers from the other Ruth, Ruth Daly. First one on board assurance framework. Ruth.
Thank you, Boyd. Yeah. So this report focuses on and aims to deliver on some of the findings of the recent internal audit review on our board assurance framework. And it proposes improvements to the way the board and its committees receive and assess assurance. So the review highlighted that the key components of our assurance framework are definitely in place and that everything's all good in that respect. However, we need to use them more effectively to provide clearer assurance to the board. And section 2 of the report details a summary of the improvement areas that were identified by that internal audit review. And a proposed improvement plan has been generated, and that's included in the report at Appendix 1. So there are a number of actions listed in that improvement plan. However, the focus of this report is to start to strengthen the board's focus on our delivery of assurance. So that includes the introduction of a standard level of assurance method, which would be applied to the board and the whole committee reporting framework. So this involves board and committee reports recommending specifically the level of assurance that can be taken from that report. And that would be on the basis of either significant, moderate, limited, or no assurance whatsoever. The internal audit report recommends also that the board reporting should include reference to strategic objectives and that a clear assessment of risks is addressed. And as you'll see from today's reports on the agenda, that we're making progress in both of those two latter areas. So to build these improvements into the way that we do our business, the standard SBAR template, that's the report template, has been revised and a proposed draft can be found at Appendix 2 to the papers. This won't stand alone, and as you can see from the entire improvement plan, there's a lot of activity around it, and there will need to be some assurance training. And we're currently sourcing this from an external training company. Given that these arrangements represent quite a significant change to the way that we do our business, we've proposed an incremental approach. And as a starter, we're suggesting that the Staff Governance Committee should act as a pilot in using the SBAR for assurance reports. And the intention is that other committees and the board itself will test the method, and with a view to that being in place then by the end of this financial year or the beginning of the next financial year. So in conclusion then, the board is asked to agree the improvement plan that's circulated at Appendix 1 and to agree the proposed level of assurance approach and the associated revised SBAR format at Appendix 2. That we pilot the introduction of that through the Staff Governance Committee, that we get feedback from Staff Governance Committee on its experiences of that, and that we can build that into the self-assessment exercise at the beginning of next year. And that other governance committees and the board start to adopt this method incrementally with a view to the whole system being embedded by the beginning of the next financial year. So I'm happy to take questions if anybody's got questions.
Fiona and then Alistair.
Yeah, and it's more a comment than a question, but I think, yeah, when Ruth and I were discussing this, I felt that it would be quite helpful for Staff Governance Committee to sort of pilot that. It's our reports typically are written by a relatively small number of people, and obviously myself and Sarah have been doing quite a lot of work on various different templates and ways of improving our governance. So we were more than happy to be guinea pigs for this, because I think it potentially fills a gap that we've identified. And I think if we should have sufficient reports, certainly in our November and January meetings, that it'll give us a good sense of any tweaks or challenges or changes that are needed.
Thank you, Fiona. Alistair, then Alex.
Yeah, for quite a short report, there's an awful lot of work behind this item that's with us this afternoon, and board assurance and a framework that allows us to get assurance is why we're all here as non-executive directors. It's the purpose of the board, of the committees feeding through. So I wonder, Boyd, because quite a lot of the actions in the Appendix 1, the improvement plan, are due in October. I'm wondering if this item should be on our next agenda as well, so we can review the matter and actually leave it as a standing item on the board agenda until we're actually happy with the piloting it through one committee and maybe adding the next committee through it, because without a good assurance framework, everything else becomes difficult for us to manage, to evaluate, to evidence, to take assurance from. But I think this is a really positive start. I like the layout of the new reports, the new SBAR. I think a lot of thought has gone into it. I note the follow-up into an audit we're going to get in March 22, so we can get a testing of the temperature of the water. So I think all in all this is moving in the right direction, but I'd welcome your thoughts, Boyd, on whether this could be a standing item on future agendas, just so we can monitor and evaluate the progress. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Did you mean on committee as well as board agendas?
I think it will automatically happen at committee because they're the pilot, but I think on the main board agenda this meeting, yeah.
Yeah, the next full meeting of the board will be in November, I think. Although we may have another meeting before that, but it'll be a one-item meeting to discuss the National Care Service consultation exercise. So yes, in principle, I don't have a problem at all with that, and I would welcome it. I think it's we've talked a lot about journeys today, but this is another journey on just like risk. It's improving our governance arrangements and our assurance framework. Ruth, are you happy with that too?
Absolutely happy with that. Yes, in fact, I think if we start to implement this through staff governance, we can see how staff governance have managed that and see what their thoughts are and their experiences in time for the next board meeting. Certainly, yeah.
Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. I echo what Alistair was saying. I think this is good. Again, there's an awful lot of work falling on not an awful lot of people when we look at the plan, but that's what it is. One thing I would suggest that we do after we've discussed the RMP4, it may be that we want to extend some of these actions. I'm looking at 9 and 10 in particular, to include what we're doing in RMP4, in particular KPIs, how that links in. So we can tie the whole lot together. Now, hopefully, as we move forward, RMP4 effectively, or the need for an RMP drops out because the strategy does its job, and then we've got the plan that comes off that strategy. But up to now, I think we need to include RMP, what is it, 4, yeah, in this as a bit of a help. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, any further points? And are you content, therefore, with the asks that Ruth has articulated? Okay, thank you. And we move on to the blueprint for good governance now, the action plan, which has its origins in the good governance blueprint. Was that 2019 or 18?
Yes, it was 2019. And in 2019, we had 14 actions which were in front of us. And as you can see there, we've made very good progress on the whole improvement plan. So the action plan is attached as an appendix showing achievement and progress on all 14 of those specific areas of improvement. So our blueprint action plan has increased our board effectiveness, and it's been supplemented by a local governance review which took place last year, and indeed this year's committee self-assessment exercise. The internal audit review on our board assurance framework recommends also that we establish an independent assessment of our system of governance, which chimes with a recommendation in the blueprint itself. So this report's inviting the board to note the progress that we've made so far and to agree that we will commission an external independent review of our governance framework to take place during 2022. So we're actually awaiting further advice and direction from Scottish Government in terms of active governance and how the blueprint might be developed from here on in, and we'll inform you of that as soon as we get further information on that.
There are liable to be considerable changes to the blueprint, judging by the discussions we've had at the national chairs meetings, and it's expected that these will be approved by the end of this year, so we can expect to get the document probably early in 22. Any questions for Ruth on this one? I think it's just heartening to see the progress that has been made in the 2-year period, and thank you, Ruth, for preparing this paper for us. We have also to agree to commission an independent review of governance arrangements during next year, and I already have some ideas about ways in which we might do that, but we can leave that for another day. We're getting to the end of a very long day already. So yeah, are you happy to approve? Thank you. And Ruth, again, board and committee meeting timetable for 2022, the calendar of meetings.
Yep, so this is the proposed calendar of meetings for next year. The dates for the governance committees have been agreed with the respective chairs of those committees, and as soon as these dates are agreed, we'll be communicating that to all committee members. The dates are based on our existing schedule of development sessions and strategy days. Just for your information as well, the year planner that is circulated there does not include committee development sessions at the moment. And once those are finally in place, then we will be circulating that out to everybody so you can see the full suite of meetings and commitments that are for you.
I think we did have some discussion in the smaller group that meets on a Monday morning, Pam and Anne and Ruth and myself and David, about the nature of the Monday meetings before the board meetings, which are called development sessions. And we wondered, in fact, if they should be so called. And also we thought we should move to the kind of format we had yesterday. But I think that's something for a further discussion before the end of the year. It was just to highlight that point so that you might start thinking about how we use the Monday sessions, which are actually extra to what other boards would normally have and have been held, I think, historically, because of the geography of NHS Highland and the fact that board members come long distances, and we wanted to capitalise on their presence when they're here to have multiple meetings. But in the new world, in the new virtual world, that necessity has changed. So just to alert you to some discussion about how we utilise Mondays going forward, but we can do that at a later date. Are you happy to agree to Sarah? And Sarah first, and then Graham.
I'm probably pointing out the incredibly obvious, but I know there's always a little bit of backwards and forwards, trying to agree the IJB dates as well. And I'm just very mindful of the fact that there are 4 of us here are obviously on the IJB, so it'd be good to get it. I know that takes a little bit of negotiation, but once we've got all that kind of pinned down, it'd be good to get it recirculated again. Thanks.
Absolutely. In fact, I've been in discussion with Charlotte Craig today, so.
Thanks for bringing that up. Graham?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just about the development days, since becoming a non-executive director with NHS Highland, it's something that I've really enjoyed, and I have learned a lot through the development days. So as I stand, I think they're very useful and very beneficial to all board members. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Graham. And we will still, of course, have the bi-monthly meetings focusing on strategy. Can we move on to the governance and committee assurance reports, starting with finance, resources and performance? Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really to add to what the minutes there. We discussed earlier on in the IPQR the kind of things we were focusing on in terms of the performance, the cancer dates and updates on that, and some of the other performances, both on the hospital side and on the financial side. As we said, and it said earlier, we've certainly got this big risk about not meeting the savings target, and that was emphasised in the minutes. So that's really all. Nothing else to add. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Highland Health and Social Care Committee, Anne.
Thanks, Boyd. I've nothing to add. Thank you.
Clinical Governance, Gaynor.
Thanks, Chair. I have nothing to add other than you have the minutes there before you. Thank you.
Thanks, Gaynor. The Area Clinical Forum, is Katrina with us?
I am, yes. No, I don't have anything to add to the minute, but I'm happy if anybody's got any questions with regards to it.
Any questions? Okay, can we move on to Alistair and the Audit Committee?
Yes, thank you, Boyd. I think the only thing to draw colleagues' attention to is item 10, which is the management follow-up report on outstanding audit actions. The Audit Committee is really looking that these are all cleared up by its next meeting, so executives and non-executives who chair committees may want to just cast their eyes over that to see if there's any that they are sponsors for or down to list. But overall, great progress has been made in clearing these up, and there is a small number of ones still to be resolved, and hopefully they'll be resolved by our next meeting. So thank you, Boyd.
Thank you, Alistair. Staff Governance, Sarah.
Thank you, Boyd. I mentioned it earlier, but just to bring people's attention to the fantastic presentation we had on medical education from Helen Freeman, and to congratulate the team on the work that they've done, really innovative. And also we had a fantastic presentation from Catherine Sutton, drawing our attention to the amazing work that's happening in acute under such pressured times. Just a couple of things to bring people's attention to. Obviously, staff wellbeing is our top concern within the committee, and we're looking at how we use the data available, as we picked up earlier, with regards to mental health absence stats, and just also to draw people's attention to the ongoing work around Statman training. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. And you're back on for the IJB.
It's me again. Yep, so people can obviously see what we discussed. One thing just to highlight, which you maybe can't pick up through the minutes, is that we have been looking at the culture updates since the work began. We've been looking at the IJB, but that has really developed now within the Health and Social Care Partnership, and the reports that we saw at the IJB were based on the things that you have all seen to date, but actually told through an Argyll and Bute lens, so really concentrating on what that looks like for us locally and how that's translating on the ground, and looking in particular at how our partners in the council are supporting that work, so that all of the staff within the HSCP can be supported through that programme. So that maybe doesn't quite come through because you'd be forgiven for thinking it's just the same papers, but we are making real efforts to put our own spin on it to make it more relatable. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any questions about any of these assurance reports? In which case, can you confirm that we've had adequate assurance from the governance committees, and note the minutes and agreed actions from both the clinical forum, area clinical forum, and the Argyll and Bute IJB? Happy to do so. Thank you, and we now come to AOCB. I have one item. Does anybody else have items of AOCB? Okay, today is a very significant day for the board in that we're losing 3 members of the board this month. This is our last meeting, as I understand it. The first of these is our UHI observer, Professor Sandra McCrory, who I think is taking some retirement, professional retirement, and we wish her well in that regard. And I gather that you're going to be replaced, Sandra, by Professor Brian Williams, and that we'll expect him to possibly to be attending the next meeting. But I would just like to thank you for your contribution to the board over the years, certainly that I've been chair of the board, and before that, I suspect as well. And to say what an important relationship it is, as I think you were also articulating earlier, between the university and the health board, particularly in the area of health studies and professional training. So we wish you well, Sandra, as you go to pastures new, or maybe you don't go that far, but we hope you enjoy your retirement and that you will maintain an interest in health matters and in the work of the board. Can you confirm, Sandra, that about Brian? I'm sure that Sandra's with us now. Anyway, we move on to the second departure, and that is Margaret Moss, who was chair of the ACF. And unfortunately, Margaret has suffered ill health for several months now and has been off work. Did return to work on a phased basis, but I think had to take some more time off, and contacted me to say that she would really have to give up her role as chair of the clinical forum. I think she's still going to continue in her work role and see how she gets on with that. But she wanted to be divested of the role with the area clinical forum. She regretted having to do that very much, because her term would have come to an end, I think, in April of next year. And Margaret has made a very substantial contribution to the work of the board, again, in my time as chair here. And I think we would all wish Margaret well, and that she would have a recovery from a good recovery from her ailments at present, and just to thank her very much for her contribution to the board. And I'm sure we can note that and convey that to Margaret. And that Katrina would also be able to relay that on our behalf as well. And finally, last but not least, this is Adam's last meeting as employee director, an essential role on the board, a role that is filled by a nomination by peers, and Adam has been now in that role for over two terms of 4 years, first elected in 2013. So he's done his stint, and during these 8 years there have been highs and lows in the work of the board, and throughout it, Adam has retained a very calm and considered demeanour and presence throughout. He's served on many different groups and committees, in fact, on a huge amount of committees. He's made a significant contribution to the board during his tenure. He's been a member of the Staff Governance Committee, the Remuneration Committee, the Endowment Committees, and co-chair of the Area Partnership Forum and its associated subgroups. Over and above that, he's also served as a board member on the Highland Health and Social Care Committee and on the Clinical Governance Committee. I'm not sure how he found time to do all of that, Adam, but thank you for that very obvious commitment to the work of the board and to your own dedication to that role. And we're sorry to mark your departure today, but we are glad that you're not going into retirement, that you're going to continue to work for NHS Highland, and that you will be doing so in a project capacity going forward. So we wish you well in that regard, and we thank you for your very substantial contribution to the board over the 8-year period.
Thank you, board.
And Adam will be succeeded by Elspeth Caithness as employee director from the beginning of next month. We had hoped that she would be able to be with us today as an observer, but she was unable to be present. But we'll welcome Elspeth at the next meeting. Are there any other items of business anybody has? In that case, bringing this meeting to a close. We have our next meeting in November, and if you've still got the energy to go out and have a walk around and get some fresh air, I would encourage you to do so after a very long day at the screen. So thank you all very much. It's been a very full day, but a stimulating day as well. And thank you all for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye,
Bye, everyone. Bye.